last year with IOM, I directed a research project about environmental migration, so-called environmental migration, which is the theme which we'll discuss today. And this theme happens to fit quite well with the curriculum of the course you are doing right now. I hear it's one of the last sessions, I think, of this course. So you've explored many topics with the aim of exploring the interaction between different environmental factors and socio-economical factors. And today we're going to do exactly that with migration and environment. Human mobility migration, which is a human phenomenon, and how does this phenomenon is impacted by different environmental factors, and how is this relevant to sustainable development policies. So that's the plan for today. Okay, so very nice for me to see we have at least 3 different subjects here. So it's nice to have an interdisciplinary composition of the group. And what would be interesting during the module is that you think about this particular subject from the point of view of your own object of study. So economists can think about how the issues that we will talk about today are relevant to economic development, economic sustainability, etc. And future politicians here can think about, on a policy perspective, how does the interactions between migration and environment are relevant to a policy perspective. So, well, the main objective is to get done with the boring stuff first. The main objective of the module is to understand the interactions between different socioeconomic factors. Socioeconomic factors which can be very wide and varied in their nature. Environmental change, which can be also quite wide. We can talk about some short-term phenomenon or longer-term phenomenon such as climate change, water scarcity, etc. And how do these relate with migration dynamics? So how do all these factors interact with the decision of people to migrate or not? And see the implication of these interactions for sustainable development policies. So this is the main objective. This sounds quite abstract when you look at it this way, but I hope that at the end of this module this will be a bit more concrete. And specific objective, this is more or less the 3 parts in which the module will be divided. First of all, to acquire an overview of the conceptual frameworks, theories, and methodological issues related to the study of the interaction between environmental factors, environmental change, and migration dynamics. This will be more the conceptual, brain-demanding, theoretical part of the module. And then, in the second part, we will apply these theoretical frameworks to a concrete case, which is the case of Kyrgyzstan, of course, the country we're in right now. And at the end, we'll try to explore the public policy implications of environmental migration interaction, which basically means once we know more or less what's happening, what should we do about it? So that's the plan for today. So the starting point would be simply to ask, what is environmental migration? Who has heard about this term before? You have? Where did you hear about it?
From the handbook.
From the handbook, okay. Okay, so a lot of you have never heard about this. So this is indeed quite a new phenomenon, a new concept, a new object of study. So it'll be interesting to hear what I say in environmental migration. What do you think about it? And for that, to warm up a little bit the atmosphere, we'll just do a small exercise. Should take about 5 minutes. So I'll ask each of you to take a piece of paper and write a word or a sentence. It can be a drawing or a graph about the first thing that comes to your mind when you think about environmental migration. The concept of environmental migration is very messy, it's very hard to comprehend, it's very wide. We have some global phenomena, which weather events moving around the globe. We have some geopolitical, we have some demographic, population density phenomena. So this exercise shows that environmental migration is indeed a quite difficult concept, and we talk later about the difficulties of the concept. So the first thing, actually, that the term environmental migration supposes is that environment causes migration. It's pretty simple. People moving because of short-term events, which could be flood, landslides, or longer-term events, like on this picture, which is drought, leading people to move because they cannot sustain their agricultural activities anymore. So this is the most obvious thing that the term suggests. So the term is quite new, but do you think that the phenomenon of people moving because of environmental factors is new? And of course in the media, we're seeing this more and more. For example, this is a citation from the New York Times in November, just at the time where there was the Paris conference on climate change. And the journalist wrote that scientists fear climate effect so severe that they might destabilize governments, produce waves of refugees. So it's quite a catastrophic perspective. Another one read here. One of the most robust predictions that can be made about climate change is that it will send millions, perhaps tens or hundreds of millions of people in search of new homes. By mid-century, the Syrian refugee crisis is likely to seem routine. So in the media we see a lot of this kind of dramatic outlook on environmental migration. So what do you think, this is a question, what do you think may be the risk of this catastrophic perspective of seeing in the media that hundreds of millions of people will be on the road because of floods, tsunamis, etc. So this is just to say that we should be careful about not focusing only on the catastrophic events. And finally, so yeah, environmental migration is used in the scholarly environment, is used in the media, and also in politics. The Maldives, this is exactly this. Actually, this is quite an interesting picture. This is the Council of Ministers of the Maldives, which in 2015, I think, conducted the meeting on the water. So you see signing the paper, and this was, of course, a PR initiative to raise the awareness of the international community, to say that one day we'll have to, live on the water. So this is another example of this dramatic event. Another example of the relevance of environmental migration in the politics circle is, in 2015 there was the Paris Climate Agreement, the most comprehensive agreement that was reached in terms of climate change to this day. And it's the first big-scale and explicit acknowledgement of the impact of climate change on migration, on displacement. And you see this in the preamble of the agreement. It mentions to establish a task force to develop recommendations for an integrated approach to avert, minimize, and address displacement related to the adverse impact of climate change. It's just a small mention. There's no particular provisions in the Paris Agreement more than that, but at least it is mentioned, and it means that it is recognized by the political community. So environmental migration is used by different people, different contexts, and it also seems to designate different phenomena. So here we see a landslide which destroy homes and which force people to move. Landslides which are in some region of the world, including Kyrgyzstan, getting more and more frequent due to the impacts of climate change and the changes in precipitation patterns. In Kyrgyzstan, we'll talk about this later, but people die almost each year by landslides which destroy their homes. We can think about floods, about more progressive phenomena such as the drought, and I'm not sure which island this is, but it's another example of islands which are about 1.5 meters above sea level and which could probably disappear completely in a few decades or a few centuries. So this is kind of dramatic impacts. So environmental migration is used by different people to designate different phenomena, and It's also investigated through different methods. Some people will use climatologists or environmentalists can use a more quantitative research and hard data, trying to make predictions and trying to crossing data about human mobility, like how many people left this area during the last 10 years, and is this related in some way with precipitation patterns, with drought, with agricultural productions, and they try to make statistical links between those things. And other scholars, other researchers can use a completely different approach and use more qualitative research, anthropological research, for instance, to conduct interviews with people and try to understand in more subtle ways their decision-making process leading to migration or not. So you can ask a farmer, do you intend to stay here or to migrate? And he can say, oh, I plan to leave my land plot. Why? Because of these and these reasons, and try to understand which role do environmental factors play in that decision process. So what this shows is that there are sometimes hidden factors in migration which can be environmental. Can we say that the Syrian refugees are environmental migrants or environmental refugees? Of course not. That would be to go a bit far. They fled because of war and persecution and violence. But when you dig deeper and you go to the root causes of the reason why they left, you can see that environmental causes are important and that they played a role. So this shows that there is often a hidden environmental flavor into migration dynamics which are hard to see at first glance, but which nevertheless exist. And this also shows that it can be an issue of, like we said, of security, of disaster risk reduction, of humanitarian action. So last question we can ask, not last, but another question we can ask is environmental migration a useful concept? Did you have the texts that were into the curriculum for that module? You didn't receive that, didn't you? No? Probably not there. So what do you think can be the problems with environmental migration as a concept, as an object of study, conceptually? Do you think it's useful? This was one of the texts that that was in the curriculum. I won't read all of that, but this author says that the environmental migration nexus has no intrinsic or potential validity as a tool for analysis or as a guide to policy actions. And why is there so many criticism to the concept? Well, one of the main reasons is that migration, the fact of people moving from one place to another, either very close or very far in another country, only one person or whole family, etc., is a very complex process, and there's lots of causes that enters into the equation before someone decides to move. And this graph shows it pretty well. These would be the reasons for migration, for the decision of you or your family to move. And these are political drivers, discrimination, persecution, in the Syrian case, for example, demographic drivers. Here we had population growth, and environmental drivers. So you see in this graph that environmental drivers are just one of the many factors that enter into the equation of migration. And of course, environmental drivers can affect the other drivers. As the Syrian case, we saw that the drought, which is an environmental change, impacted political drivers because people arrive in the cities and the food prices increase, which is also an economic driver. And all these combination of factors lead to the decision of people to migrate or stay. Like I said, to which point can we start talking about environmental migrants or environmental migration, considering that a whole range of factors enters the equation, and how to measure it, how to isolate and say that the decision of this guy to migrate, 15% was due to environmental factors and 30% to economic factors. It's quite impossible to do that. So this is why environmental migration is a difficult concept. Another problem is so-called hidden environmental factors. Well, the Syrian example is another one. We wouldn't think, just like this at first glance, that environmental factors may have played a role in the crisis and in the migration that followed, but when you dig a bit deeper, you realize that it might have been the case. And to take an example from Kyrgyzstan, for instance, when we conducted our research, we went in to conduct some interviews with people in some households, and we asked them, well, did you plan to stay here or go? Some of them told us that we plan to go, or some of the members of the family, the two sons, will go to Bishkek or Russia to work. So why? Because of unemployment. Okay, so unemployment, it's an economic factor, right? Unemployment. But then, why is there unemployment? Because we can't produce enough potatoes or wheat or vegetables to make a living from our land. Okay, why can't you produce enough vegetables and wheat, etc.? Because we don't have enough water, or the water comes all at spring, beginning of summer, and at the end of the summer there's no more water. So it's an environmental reason. And why they don't have enough water? Is that because of natural phenomena such as the climate change, or is it because of man-made phenomena such as poor infrastructures of irrigation? Maybe a bit of both. So the respondent said unemployment, economic reason, but when you go deeper, you realize that this unemployment has some environmental reasons, and this is why I call hidden factors. So it's a bit hard sometimes to see them at first glance. That's why qualitative methods like interviews, anthropological approach can be very useful in investigating these topics, because if you just try to do statistics, you might find that employment causes migration, and that's it. Alright, so thank you for bearing with me in this conceptual part. This was more theoretical. There is a lot more to say about all this, but we'll end this now, and if you want to go further, you can read the articles that I put into the curriculum, which I think you have. If you don't have them through your system, you can just find them on Google Scholar. They're quite easy to find. So anyone has any question, reflection, ideas to end with? For the hunger is